Hello, and welcome to today's European SharePoint, Office 365 and Azure Community webinar. My name is Laura, and I'm delighted to be joined by Lennert Verwimp, Power Platform Consultant and Team Lead for Real Dolmen in Belgium, and Kristof Leyssens, who is a Solution Manager in Low Code with Real Dolmen in Belgium, who will present the topic, a step-by-step guide for great user experience in Canvas apps. Remember to join in on the conversation about today's webinar on Twitter. Our Twitter handle is @EuropeanSP and our hashtag is #ESPC23. Don't forget to check out the Resource Centre. This is updated daily with the latest blogs, ebooks, webinars and how-to videos. Simply visit sharepointeurope.com and click the Content tab at the top. Continue your learning by joining us for our next webinar. Wow your co-workers with awesome looking lists. Conditional formatting in SharePoint, which takes place on Wednesday, February 1st from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. CET. For full details, please check out sharepointeurope.com/register for webinars. Last November, over 2,000 SharePoint, Office 365 and Azure professionals joined us in Copenhagen for ESPC 22. We now have an amazing showreel video full of ESPC 22 highlights. Visit sharepointeurope.com to watch this brief recap of all the learning, development, networking and fun that was had over this amazing 4-day event. Next week, we are launching our ever popular 2-for-1 offer on ESPC 23 tickets. This offer is valid for 1 day only, so be sure to get in early to snatch up this unbeatable deal. This is a limited offer, so mark your calendars because you don't want to miss out on this deal. Make sure to visit sharepointeurope.com next Wednesday, February 1st to avail of this offer. The ESPC 23 call for speakers is now officially open. Be part of something truly special. Speak and engage with leading experts, IT professionals, developers and business decision makers at ESPC 23, Europe's premier Microsoft 365 and Azure conference. This is your chance to take a leading role within the conference and the community, sharing your in-depth knowledge, passion and experience with your peers, in turn helping empower the Microsoft 365 and Azure community to professional success. Please visit sharepointeurope.com/submit-speak-ESPC to find out more. After the webinar, we will have a questions and answer session. Type any questions you might have into the questions window. Questions will be selected and answered at the end of the presentation. This webinar will be recorded and added to the Resource Centre, where you will be notified by email when it is available. And now I'm going to pass you over to our webinar presenters, Lennert and Kristof. Hello, Lennert. Hello, Kristof.
Hello.
Hello.
Can we get started?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, perfect.
Awesome. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our session on creating a great UX in Canvas apps. Let's kick off with introducing ourselves. So my name is Kristof Leyssens. I'm a solution manager of low code at Real Dolmen in Belgium. And I brought my partner in crime, Lennert, with me. Lennert, you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, so hi everyone, I'm Lennert Verwimp. I'm also a consultant and team lead at Real Dolmen. And as you can see on the slide, I'm a Power Platform fanboy of the very first hour. So I've been working with Power Platform for basically when I was still in school, and I've never looked back ever since.
Yes, and besides our working experiences, we also join once a month in our wonderful studio to talk about all the latest and the greatest of the Power Platform. So if you want to know our experiences with all the updates that come to the Power Platform, then feel free to have a look. Today we'll talk about UX, user experience, and I guess the reason why you are all here is because you also believe that UX is very important, not just when creating Power Apps, but also in our daily life. You know, what would life be with poor UX? We would all be very frustrated. So we believe that UX is very important whenever we are building Power Apps and Canvas apps in particular. And that is why we created like a couple of easy steps, basically, that we tackle within every project in order to get a wonderful user experience. Now, User experience is sometimes, you know, a very vague or a very broad term. So what we think UX is, it's actually user experience. It's not really the way something looks. It's not really the layout of your app or the design or the colors or the branding that you use. It's rather how the app works. So if we can summarize it, then UX is basically how something works, and UI, the user interface, is how something looks. We will be mostly discussing UX today. However, UI is, UX and UI go hand in hand. Now, when should you consider a UX in Power Apps? And basically, we believe that it's like an exponential curve depending on the audience of your app. When you start building your app and you build it for yourself, then you know UX isn't like the most important thing of your app. You probably think more about functionality. However, when you start sharing that app with your team, for example, with maybe 5 or 10 team members, then you do want to implement some basic UX principles to make sure that your team members can properly use your Power App. However, it's still not like top priority. I guess the tipping point would be whenever you start deploying your Power Apps to multiple teams. At this point, it's absolutely crucial to start thinking before you build, like make sure that you consider a couple of things before you start diving into the Power App Studio and building your Power App. And then obviously when you start building apps for an entire organization, then UX is really something that we consider as part of a strategy when building our app. Starting off with just so the core concepts, things that we can reuse maybe over particular or over the various apps that we create within that organization. When we talk about getting UX done, getting a good UX there, we always take 4 steps that we use when we develop important apps for organization-wide or Power Apps that have to be used within various departments. Those steps are starting off with a good strategy. Think about something before we begin. We define an information architecture. After that, we will be designing, and finally we will do some testing, and we'll give you some insights in how we do that testing as well. Today we'll discuss those 4 steps. I will be mostly talking about the theoretical part, and then Lennert will guide you through the practicalities on how to do these things within Power Apps Studio. So starting off with strategy, thinking before you start building. Why? Well, very easy. You can use an eraser on the drawing table, or you can use a sledgehammer on the construction site. We choose for the first one. So we start with thinking about how we should design our Power Apps. And when doing that, we will have a couple of things in mind. But basically, the principle is you need to see things from the user's point of view. So don't get in there thinking about specific functionality like buttons and galleries and whatnot, but really think like from a user's point of view. Make sure that you know who your users are. If there are different audiences, we can have, for example, operators and supervisors and administrators. Typically, those people have different tasks to do. So make sure that you know what tasks they are doing. Maybe an operator is just making some pictures on the work floor or scanning QR codes, and a supervisor might be doing more complex stuff. Make sure that you know what they are doing, and also make sure that you know the context they are working in. An operator, for example, might be working in a factory, in a shopping floor, using a smartphone device, while a supervisor might be on the desk using just his laptop. That's a different context. You should bear that in mind when designing your UX strategy. When you go to the previous one, Lennert is controlling the slide, so trying to keep up with him. So what we do when we really design these more complex applications that we want to deploy for our entire organization is that we map this out. So we really start with sitting together with our users, with our different audiences, and we start defining like the different target groups. We map that with the needs that they have, with the specific content that they need to work with within our app. And we map that also with specific business goals that those audiences have. Obviously, this is this takes some time. You know, it's an effort that you should consider. In our opinion, it's very worthwhile if you are doing UX design for a Power App that you want to deploy into an entire organization that would have hundreds of users, or a Power App that is very business critical. You know, think about a Power App that you will use in a factory, in a plant, that is really like doing some final approval before the goods ship to the distributors. Those things are very business critical. You want it to work well, not only from a functional side, but also the operators, the supervisors, or any audience. You want them to easily understand what they are using. Obviously, if you want to design smaller Power Apps, you don't have to do this, but at least get around the table, make some sketches, write down what they are doing. Be sure that you know what your users will be doing with the app. If we proceed, oh yeah, maybe let's get to you, Lennert, on this. What is your experience with previous slides? This is something that we also see within the customers that we build apps for, right?
Yeah, so exactly to your point, what I notice a lot of times, and I think everyone every consultant who builds apps for organizations is that very often, and the case that I'm referring to is from a client of ours who is a large pharmaceutical company. They had a case where one user, one team lead started building an approval application for their team just for personal productivity. So in reference to one of the previous slides to the curve, she started building it at the very left just for herself and her team. But because her app worked so well, other team leads became interested in it as well, of course. And other team leads asked her, yeah, maybe could I use your app as well? And then she was like, yeah, of course, here. And she shared it. And then the app didn't suffice for some, or some requested, could you maybe add this one as well? Or could you maybe tweak this a little bit so that it's better for my needs as well? And of course, she was able to do that because she was getting quite good at building Power Apps. But after a while, the app became so large because so many people used it, and there were so many different functionalities or purposes to the application that weren't foreseen in the beginning. So yeah, it became quite unmanageable, right? So the app started small, but became like a house of cards that would collapse when one piece would break because it was patched together pretty not poorly, but delicately, maybe is a better word. So that's why this is very important, right? You have to not only think about how you want your app, or how you want to use your app right now, but also how you might want to expand in the future, so that you can keep that in mind when building the application. That's what we do as well. We ask to stakeholders beforehand and ask them what future expansions we might expect as well, so that we can anticipate them when building the application. So yeah, this is definitely something to keep in mind with when building applications.
Yeah, exactly. So when we go to the next step, so we probably thought about what the app should do, how it should work, etc. We start off with the next phase, which is information architecture. And within this step, we try to map all the different functionality within different screens. We set up a navigation layout. I really like all the core concepts, the fundamentals, let's say, of our Power App. We will be mapping down in here. We use two different models for that, or things that we think are very important when doing so. First one is the happy flow, and the happy flow is a concept that everybody knows. Whenever you're going to a website or using an app or whatever, apps are built for the most optimal process to a desired goal. So think about if you order something from a web shop, it has a very specific process. You put something in a shopping cart. Next step is that you have to enter your delivery details. Next step is you get an overview. Then you have to pay. Then you get a confirmation screen. This is the optimal flow for a web shop. However, this is not the only functionality there. There's plenty of other stuff. At any given point in the process, you can get back to the product catalog. You can choose a different product. You can add more products. You can see the terms and conditions. You can do all sorts of stuff, but they are nicely grouped somewhere on the side. They are there, but they are not like immediately visible, or the focus is elsewhere. Focus is on the happy flow, and that is also what we try to do within our Power App. Also why strategy and thinking is so important, because we have to define this happy flow. In Power Apps, you can do so by grouping certain tasks or actions together. Make sure that you prioritize what is really necessary. Don't overload your screen with a lot of stuff, but really focus on this happy flow. And then consider what screens you should make and define the navigation in function of this happy flow. And then I will show you in a minute how to do so. But the second model that we use is a mental model. The mental model is, it originates from psychology. It's a very thankful one, something that our human brain is capable of, is immediately mapping certain patterns. Think about when you go to a mobile website and you see a hamburger menu. You know that it's a menu, you can click it and it's, it fades in or it rolls out or down or whatever, but you know it's there. If you want to close a certain screen or a dialog box or so, you know that on the top right corner you have this X cross that you can click and it closes down. Search box, for example. Everybody knows on any website, search box is typically on top right corner. Unless you are using Office 365, then it's on the center of your screen on the top. But typically these things, they are so drilled into our brain because every website, every app is doing it on this particular way, that it also helps us with user experience. So make sure that you use that. Don't start doing your own thing. Don't put your search box somewhere on the bottom or whatever. Use this mental model, use the patterns that users are accustomed to. Make sure that you have a consistent interface as well. If, for example, you have a lot of forms in your Power App and you have, let's say, a confirm button and on the side you have a cancel button, if you always put your confirm button on the right-hand side and then in one screen it switches around, it's very confusing for a user, poor user experience. Don't do that. And then finally, use the principle of similarity. Also something, a psychology trick. Our eyes and our brains can very easily map certain stuff that are grouped together. And we can group things together by using shapes, for example. Think about rectangle boxes, where you put certain forms in, form fields in, I'm sorry. And then another rectangle box on top of that. Our brain knows these are things that belong together, the other ones is something else. Same with using columns, for example. If you have 3 columns and you group them closely together and the 4th column has a more distant space, then you know that 4th column is something else. Colors, same thing. Labels in one color and a 4th label in another color, for example, probably means something else. So also make sure to use that to make it easier for a user. And then Lennert will have some tips and tricks on how to do that in Power Apps.
Yes. So I will switch to Power Apps so I can show it to you guys live. I've prepared an application. This one, I've just thought about some questions. The goal of this app is to get some information from a user. And yeah, I think it's 20 questions. So let's think about how we can make this as nice as we can for users, because of course answering a form of 20 questions is not the most interesting thing, but we have to do it right. So first of all, this screen is what I let Power Apps create itself, right? So I chose to start from data, and then Power Apps created me this application. I think everyone who built a Power App will recognize that this is a Power App with the blue on top and the blue hover right here, etc. So let's agree. I think we can all agree that this is not the most beautiful thing. So let's try to get this a bit better. So one of the options would be this. So let's go here first. What I did is I try to make a logical grouping of the questions so that users will get a few questions at a time. So 4 questions at a time, for example, so that it's easier to fill in and to concentrate on a certain thing. Then another thing that we didn't have in the previous one is everything was just a text input, right? Which isn't the smartest way to input anything. For example, gender, I created a dropdown that just has some options right here. This avoids users from typing, for example, a capital letter or the full word sometimes, so that your data is not consistent throughout. Another example right here, when we go to the educational background, is the graduation date. Of course, this is logical. We make it a date picker so that users don't have to type a date, for example. They can just click it here and then choose the date that they want. So think about what's the most logical way to input your data, or to let the user input the data. What I did as well was on the top right-hand side on the previous form that I showed you in the beginning, there was a floppy disk, and right here I changed it to a check mark. The thing with icons is if it's not 100% clear what the icon will do, if there can be confusion, you shouldn't use an icon at all, right? The floppy disk could mean users could misinterpret it as, okay, I will save this form right now and I can submit it later. Whereas this icon to me is more clear, okay, I'm done with the form, I will submit it. Of course, this is something that you can test with users as well, right? If I ask 10 people to test it and 3 of them say this is not clear to me that this will submit the form, then I should choose something else here, perhaps a button, for example. What I did as well was some styling. So I changed the banner at the top to another color to match the company colors perhaps, because the Power Apps blue that everyone knows, it's not an ugly color, but because every app has this color, I think Power Apps users develop the hate for it. So I try to avoid that as much as possible. So how I do that is by using some best practices. So there's a best practices document. I think it's shared by Matthew Devaney. Definitely an interesting document for everyone who builds Power Apps. But one of the points is to get a style library. So in the on start of the application, right now in the on start, maybe in the future it will change. It's smart to set some variables that you can use later. So you don't have to type the color value every time, and you can just reference this variable every time you need anything. In this example, I used it for colors only, but you can do it for fonts as well. And then if you need to change the style of your application, for example, if your company changes the colors, you only need to change it here, and then your whole app will follow. So you don't have to reconfigure the whole application. So for example, I think if I can show you here, the fill of this rectangle should be a reference to this variable and then the primary color. And the same for all the other colors as well. All right. Some useful things to show you. as well are right here. So we have some options in text inputs as well, for example. So now when I type my first name, this, for example, if I want to clear it, maybe first name is not the best use case for this, but if I want to clear it, previously I would have to build it so that there's an X here, and then I would have to reset something. I have to clear the box. Right now you can do that out of the box, right? So you have an option, a property, clear button, so that right now out of the box, you have an X right here and you can let the user clear it instantly. So that's a nice little thing to know as well. That's mostly nice to have in search boxes, right? Where you search something and then you might want to clear it to search something else. So that's nice to have. And then if we think about the user filling the form in, it's important to make very clear to the user which fields are which fields they have to fill in, right? Which fields are required. So of course you have the star. I chose to make it bold as well, so that there can be no mistake. And then as the user fills in this form, it's nice to give them an idea of how they're doing, right? Of how far in the process they are. So for example, if I decide to only fill in the required fields and then my address as well, I can give the user an identification of okay, this part, this category of questions is finished, so you can go on to the next one. And then if I fill in my email address here, for example, and go to the next one, you'll see that I get the 2 check marks and that the user knows, okay, I'm doing fine, almost finished. Another important thing as well is put the more difficult questions or the annoying questions at the bottom, because users, if they get an annoying question as the first question, they might just close the questionnaire and never return to it. But if the annoying questions are at the bottom, the users will think, okay, I've gotten this far, I'll just do some extra effort to fill in these questions and submit the form as well, right? So that's also a nice tip that I keep in mind when building applications. All right. So this is one way of implementing this form. Maybe as well when submitting a form, because all the items here can be collapsed when submitting a form, and the user didn't fill in a required field, make it so that it's very clear which fields, right? You might want to pop the certain theme open or the certain category open and make it red so that the user knows why they can submit. That's very important as well. And then just the detail on the buttons, because as you can see, this is a mobile application. Clickable things, clickable icons, for example, you have to keep in mind that fingers are not as precise as a mouse or as a cursor. So a rule of thumb is when your application will be used only, when users will only interact with your application with a cursor, you should make your icons at least 44 pixels wide and high. And when they would interact with a finger, it should be at least 48 pixels, but something that's better is 60 pixels. That's what I usually use as well, so that your app is easy to operate and users won't misclick as well. Also, the spacing between certain icons, clickable icons, is important as well, right? All right. So an alternative way of splitting this form up is to split it up in different pages. So same principle, right? I have the 5 categories, but I just make it so that users can move through them by going to the next page instead of having the different categories below each other. When we think back about what Kristof was talking about the mental model and the happy flow, when users fill in this form, they will know, okay, I filled this one in. I go to the top right to go to the next one. I fill this one in, top right to go to the next one, next one till the very end. And then they will know, okay, to finish, I would have to click this thing. However, I indicated, okay, you're in the last one, but if users go through it pretty quickly, they might click this accidentally. So it's very important to give an extra message here with in the form of a pop-up that says, are you sure you want to submit a form? Yes or no. This yes or no order is important as well. I usually put yes on the right-hand side, no on the left-hand side. That's what's the most logical to me, but I've seen people who think it's more logical to switch them. An advice I would give is, doesn't matter which way you do it, but keep it consistent so that within your company or within your app at least, yes would always be on the right-hand side and no would always be on the left-hand side. All right, that's this thing. So this thing, I mentioned it as well. It's nice for users to know how far they are in the process of filling in the form. So keep them updated. You might want to do it this way or with like a colored status bar at the bottom where they can see, okay, you're halfway there. Keep going to encourage them, right? Then some more technical tips I can give is in the form. So this is just a basic Power Apps form, right? The out-of-the-box form where I changed the visible properties depending on a certain value, a certain variable. So if I click this thing, these fields will all become visible and the others will be invisible. The same for the other form with the pages as well. It's the same principle. When styling the application, when styling forms, I think a struggle that a lot of people that build apps would know is there's not really a way that I knew of to change, for example, the hover color in bulk, right? So if I wanted this hover color, for example, to be purple, or maybe it's more clear if I show it in the first one because they're all open. If I would like to change this hover color to a certain color, I would have to go here and then hover fill, and then I would have to change it to pink, for example. And then, okay, if I hover, I can see that it's changed here, but I would have to go through all the 20 data cards to change it, which isn't really nice. So there's a workaround that I found out recently. I think it was from a video of Reza Dorani, which is really always interesting to watch. If you don't know him, definitely look him up. But you have here the layout property. So you select your form, you have the layout property. If you change this to horizontal and then press Ctrl-Z to undo what you just did, I don't know if Microsoft intended this, but you select the data card values and the data card keys of all the forms. So you can change the hover fill in bulk to, for example, purple. And then if you go here, you will see that all the hovers of the labels as well, right? Because you selected them will become a different color. Of course, I don't want this for the labels. So what I could do is, so I do the same thing, right? I change it, I select them all, and I can control click. Okay, maybe I don't want the data card values, and then I can change only the ones that I select here. I would have to click 20 times for one time for each data card, but it's still a bulk edit, which is really interesting to have here. Another thing as well, if you want to change border colors, for example, you can select one data card, control click another data card. You'll see it seems that you can't control click because the focus changes. But if you control click again, you can actually select multiple. And then you can click Control A to select all data cards. And then you could change the border color to green, for example, and then you will see that all border colors are changed to green as well. UI-wise, I maybe didn't choose the prettiest colors, but it's clear, more clear this way, I suppose. All right. I think this covers the first demo. If, of course, there are questions about how I built this, definitely ask them in the chat, and then we might get back to them in the end as well. But first, I will give the word back to Kristof.
Yes, thank you, Lennert, for the very useful tips and tricks. So this basically, hopefully, inspires you a bit on architecture design, on the mental model, and how we use those principles. In the next phase, we would actually start designing our Power App. And within that design process, we typically do that straight from within Power App Studio. So we build our prototype there. These days, we do have Figma integration as well. So Figma is a design tool to build mockups. We can use Figma to build them and then import them later into Power App Studio. However, in our experience, it didn't always work just the way we wanted to, and we had to modify a lot of stuff in the studio. So we just went back to designing the prototype in the Power App Studio. And as you have seen with Lennert, he's getting quite handy in building really quick prototypes. It also gives us an additional benefit because for us, this design process is a very iterative process. So we sit together with our stakeholders from our customer. We show them what we have built. We show them our prototype. And as they give comments, we can immediately modify them within our Power App. Obviously, this Power App would have very limited functionality. It's basically just the look and feel that we want to show them. Stuff like, submitting a form, getting data from somewhere, filters, search boxes, all those stuffs. They are there, but they don't actually work. So it's just really to show them how it could look like in the end. But it's interesting because that prototype can be used later as the actual app. We just can reuse those screens and put the actual functionality behind it. Also, make sure to use component libraries. Very useful if you build several Power Apps within your organization. Make sure to use the component libraries because they are very easy and very quick to reuse, and it helps in building consistent apps. Data-wise, what we do is we don't really make the connectors to all of the different data sources that we want to integrate into our Power App. And if Lennert clicks the slide, then we can see the there we go. So data structure wise, we just use local collections, especially interesting if you want to gather some on-premise data. This setup is typically much more complex with data gateways, etc. So we just ask an export of a certain application of 10 or maybe 20 items, and we use local collections for that to make it quicker to build. And then final tip, Lennert, is the design components. This is like, this probably the only thing that we like more as Italian ice cream. It's X and Y properties and containers. So X, Y properties because it makes it so easy to properly align all of the fields and all of the items that we have on our screen. Nothing is as sloppy as one label that is 5 pixels from the left-hand side and the other one below is like 7 or 8. It hurts my eyes, so you can solve that very easily with X and Y properties. And then containers, obviously, because not only the containers allow us to make responsive designs, but they also allow us to group certain stuff together, which makes it much easier to hide things or to make stuff conditional. So these are 3 things that we use in order to build our prototypes, in order to build our design. And I think this is also something that Lennert can show you.
Yes, all right. So I'll go back to the Power Apps Designer. Okay, so for this use case, I've got another application. So I've built this one with a lot of color. You might not want to have this, but I think it shows the thing that I wanted to explain. That the Power App doesn't have to look like the Power Apps that you're probably used to, right? The blue ones. You do have a lot of flexibility, but you have to be a little bit creative. So for example, this gradient in the background, you can create by using the HTML component, HTML text component, and then pasting some code right here. So what I did was I got some inspiration from a certain computer and phone manufacturer, and I looked at their website. I got some colors right here from the Macs, and then I just put them right into this gradient so that it matches the colors of the items that are shown below. So as Kristof was talking about the data, usually when I'm making a mockup, I would indeed just create a local collection and put this in a gallery. However, in this case, I did create a backend because I wanted to be a little bit more flexible to add items and remove items, etc. But it's important to use realistic data. So for example, if I would just in this bottom one, if I would just create the text test, then I wouldn't really have that. I wouldn't know what my screen would actually look like, because if I want to in production put a quote here, if there was just one word, it looks completely different, right? So then there would be too much space, for example. So it's important to use realistic data. Be creative with buttons. Right here, this gray bar or this gray cloud in the back is just a button where I changed the hover fill and the fill and the pressed fill to the same color so that it seems like a static shape. The nice thing, of course, with buttons is that you can change the radius so that the corners are rounded. Also, these two in the top left corner and the top right corner are combinations of icons and buttons, so that you have it's just a nicer way of showing the user to go home than just having a house icon or just having a button there. So it seems like it's one unit here, but they're actually two, right? And then when talking about icons, I might have used too many here. It might not be really clear for users that they can filter here. So maybe this is not the best decision by me, but I thought it looked nice in this context. And there's limited functionality to this app, right? So I suppose users would understand what the purpose is here. And then at the top right corner, the admin button is what Kristof talked about as well. So this settings thing, I intended it to be an admin screen, for example. That might not be really clear as well by this icon, but it's just to show you guys, if this button needs to be visible to certain users and not to other users, it's important to have multiple groups of testers to test your applications with the different roles, to check, okay, is this clear for all the admins that they can go to the admin center or the settings right here. So check all the happy flows of your application from all the users. That's an important one as well. I think that covers everything. This mockup was made really fast. So when I do mockups, I often do it straight into Power Apps instead of making something in a separate program and then having to build it in Power Apps later. Because here, when I show this to users, I can guarantee them that this is what I can build, right? I don't give any false hopes, maybe. This is, what you see is what you get, basically. All right, so let's go to the final part of the slides then.
Yes, thank you, Lennert. So at this point, we designed our prototype of our app. We discussed it with our stakeholders. We made our final modifications, and then we start actually building the app. So adding all of the functionality behind it. testing is a very important step as well, obviously, but also for UX. If you want to make sure that your UX is understandable for your users, you actually need to test it with those users. So do that with actual data, with real life usage, and make sure to test all the scenarios. So not just the happy flow. If there is at one point some cancel option or whatsoever, or a decline of a request or whatever, make sure to test that as well. So all of the possible scenarios. How do we test is manually. So you need your users for that. Don't test them yourself. You can't do that from a functional side to make sure that data is gathered, stored, filtered, whatever. But in order to make sure that your users understand your app, you actually need those users. So use a test audience. The good thing is that 80% of all the mistakes in UX can be identified with just 5 people. So you just need 5 people from different audiences, different personas to sit together and make them test your app. Very useful is to make them think out loud. What are they expecting? What are they trying to do? Why do they click on this particular button? Is because they want to do X or Y. That logic, the way that they think, is very, very useful when designing a good UX. Besides from manual testing, we can also do automated testing within the Power Platform. So we could define certain test scenarios that we run automatically. However, we just use them for functional stuff or for regression testing. So we just define certain test scenarios, for example, to fill in certain form data, gather form data, or gallery data, or all of that. That's something that we do with automated testing. It does take a little bit more time initially to set it up. However, if it's an app that is constantly evolving, it's very, very, very useful. So maybe invest that time, but you can benefit from it during the life cycle of your Power App. On automated testing, Lennert, any tips or tricks there? Something that we should know?
Yeah, you can use the Test Studio and Power Apps, right? As you said, I don't do it very often because I find it quite cumbersome, and the real user input is far more valuable than an automated bot running your tests. But if we check back to the first application that I showed you guys, to the very long list, in that case, automated testing would be pretty interesting to have, because you could create one test where real information is filled in. So you don't, if you would manually test this long form 20 times, you will just be typing a few letters just so that all required fields are filled in. That's not a good test. So if you create an automated test, you can ensure that realistic data is inputted every time, and you can test it automatically using that. So in certain cases, it is definitely valuable. And of course, in the Power Apps Test Studio thing, you can get the record functionality as well, right? So you can record yourself filling in the form once, and then Power Apps, if you run this test, Power Apps will do it in the exact same way again. And you can modify or add steps with code as well. So it's pretty well created by Microsoft, I think.
All right. So this concludes our 4 essential steps that we believe are required to build good UX. I don't know if there are any questions. If so, please post them in the chat and they will get to us. We will try to answer them the best we can.
Hello, yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, Laura.
Brilliant. So we have a couple of questions in here. But before we get into the questions, I just want to say a huge thanks to both of you, Lennert and Kristof, for a wonderful presentation. And thanks so much for coming on. So I'll just get straight into the questions now. So the first one I have here is, are there any good design tools that you recommend?
From my experience, really good design tools, like Figma is a good design tool, as I said, but like making the link back to Power Apps is often cumbersome. So that's why we believe building it straight in Power Apps Studio is the most efficient way of doing it. However, we do use a lot of inspiration websites that shows like a couple of designs that we can get inspired by, and use those in order to build them straight into Power Apps Studio. If you do want to use design tools, I think the most common ones are Figma and Adobe XD. I believe both of them have Power Apps components ready. So you can just import those components and start dragging along over there. But it's up to you to decide if you want to use it or not, because be aware that you might show your users stuff that isn't entirely feasible to create in Power Apps Studio. That's why we do it directly in the studio.
Brilliant. Thanks a million, Kristof. So there's just another question here. Is there a method to auto test for user experience?
Maybe Lennert has a different experience of that, but in my opinion, not so much. So if you really want to auto test on user experience, it depends a lot on how a user thinks. And I don't think that an automated test can simulate that.
Yeah, I think you get a feel for it right when you're building it. So you can keep that in mind when building it, but I don't think that a real test to tell you it's also not something that's black or white, right? There's always something in the middle, and certain people might prefer other things. So yeah, I suppose maybe if AI gets really good, there might be something in the future. But at this point, I don't know of any myself. No.
Brilliant. Thanks a million, guys. So just another question. How did you group the questionnaire questions without using separate screens?
All right, so I suppose that's back to my demo, right? So I will go back to the demo and I will show you. So how to group them, I suppose in this one, yeah, correct me if I'm referring to the wrong thing. I'm not sure if we can get feedback from the person who asked the questions, but how I built this is I worked with variables so that right here, I set a local variable, and when I click one of them, I set it to the label and the icon as well, right? So if a person just clicks here, it will open as well, so they don't have to click the icon specifically. But then this is just a very long form where most of the items are invisible, except for the ones that have this one active or set to true. Maybe I will switch to the other one as well, because this one is in one screen too, but this is the same principle. So when I click here, I just have a switch that says that has a variable. So var visible, for example, I say if it's PI, which is private information, and this one is clicked, then set it to the next one, right? And based on these abbreviations, certain questions will show from the same form right here. So in the visible property, right? So if this one is if the variable is this one, then first name, last name, gender, and address will be visible. And that's how you can switch. So this button just says, okay, set the variable to the next theme or category, and then this one sets it back to the previous category, and then these questions will become visible or invisible. I hope that's an answer to the question.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Lennert. Now, there's a couple of more questions in here, but I know, Kristof, you need to jump off just a couple of minutes early. So what I have done is I have noted down the questions, and I can send them off to yourself and Lennert, and I can include the answers along with the webinar recording later on, if that suits.
That sounds perfect. I think we have one final slide as well, Lennert, where
Yes.
Everyone can contact us directly as well if there are any questions related to this webinar. So thanks a lot for attending also from our side. It was very fun to do this. So yeah, make sure to pass them along, Laura, and if any other questions, and yeah, you can drop us a message on LinkedIn or on Twitter.
Brilliant. Thanks a million, guys. And just on behalf of the ESPC community, we want to extend a huge thank you again to you both, Lennert and Kristof, for taking the time to carry out this webinar today. We really do appreciate it. So, folks, that is the end of today's webinar. You can find this webinar and more at sharepointeurope.com/resource center. Thanks again to everyone for joining us today. Take care and enjoy your weekend.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.